I have also watched the video where Kaicenat is reading, so uh, I have decided to start reading. This is day one of this is day one of me reading a book and improve my speaking and reading habit. Okay, so Kai Sennett is one of my inspirations. Uh, as he also started reading, so I decided to follow his lead and improve my speaking skills. Okay, so uh, yes, let's start. Winston was dreaming of his mother. He must thought I'm reading 1984, and I also wanted to read Atomic Habits, but I have I know a lot of, not lot of, but I have already seen and watched YouTube video so many so about Atomic Habits, so I decided I'll not read that. Okay, all right. So we should be live. I'm not sure about the quality, but anyways, it is what it is. So all right, let's start. Okay. He thought have been 10 or 11 years old when his mother. So also should I add a timer of 1 hour? Okay, let's just add a timer of uh, 30 minutes. For it's 10:24. I'll stop at 11 11:04. He thought have been 10 or 11 years old when his mother had disappeared. She was a tall, rather silent woman with slow movements and magnificent fair hair. His father remembered more vaguely as dark and thin, dressed always in neat dark clothes. Vincent remembered especially the very thin soles of his father's shoe, wearing spectacles. The two of them must evidently have been swallowed up in one of first great purges uh, 50s. At this moment, his mother was sitting in some place deep down beneath him with his younger sister in her. Remember his sisters at all, except as a tiny feeble baby, always silent with a large. Both of them were looking up at him. They were drowned in some subterranean place, the bottom of a well, for instance, or a very deep grave, but it was place which already far below him was itself moving downwards. They were in the saloon of a sinking ship, looking up at him through the darkening water. There was still air in the saloon. They could still see him and he them. But all the while they were sinking down into the green waters, which is another moment must hide them from sight forever. He was out in the light and air while they were being sucked down to death, and they were down there because and they he knew and he could see the knowledge in their faces. There was no reproach either in their faces or in their hearts, only the knowledge that they must die in order that he might remain alive, and that this was part of the unavoidable order of things. He could not remember what had happened, but he knew in his dream that in some way the lives of his mother and sister had been sacrificed on his own. I had to process what did I just. uh, He could not remember what had happened, but he knew in his dream that in some way the lives of his mother and sister had been sacrificed on his own. It was one of those dreams which, while retaining the characteristics dream scenario, are a continuation of one's intellectual life, and in which one become aware of facts and ideas which still seem new and valuable after one is awake. The thing that now suddenly struck Winston was that his mother's death nearly 30 years ago had been tragic and sorrowful in a way that was no longer possible tragedy. He perceived belonged to the ancient time, to a time when there was a still privacy, love and friendship, and when the member of a family stood by one another without needing to know the reason. His mother's memory tore at his heart because she had died loving him when he was too young and selfish to love. Um, and because somehow he did not remember how she had sacrificed herself to a conception of loyalty that was a private and unalterable. Such things he saw could not happen today. Today there were fear, hatred, and pain, but no dignity of emotion, no deeper complex sorrows. All this he seemed to see in the large eyes of his mother and sister, looking up at him through the green water, hundreds of fathoms down, and still sinking. Suddenly, he was standing on short spring turf on a summer evening when the slanting rays of the sun glided the ground. The landscape that he was looking at recurs so often in his dream that he was never fully certain whether or not he had seen in the real world. In his waking thoughts, he called it the Golden Country. It was an old rabbit beaten pasture with a foot track wandering across it and a molehill here and there in the red hedge on the opposite side of the field. The bogs of elm trees. What is very faintly in the breeze there, leaves just stirring in dense, massive dense masses like humans were somewhere near at hand. Though out of sight, there was a clear, slow-moving stream. A dance was swimming in the pools under the willow trees. The girl with dark hair was coming towards them across the field with that seemed a single moment. She tore off her clothes and flung them disdainfully aside. Her body was white and smooth, but it aroused no desire in him. Indeed, he barely looked at it. What overwhelmed him at that instant was admiration for the gesture with which she had thrown her clothes aside. What it's Suddenly he was standing on short spring turf on a summer evening when the slanting rays of the sun glided through the ground. The landscape that he was looking at recurred so often in his dreams that he was never fully certain whether or not he had seen it in the real world. In his walking thoughts, he called it the Golden Country. It was an old rabbit-bitten pasture with a foot track wandering across it, and molehole here and there in the ridge hedge on the opposite side of the field. The boughs of elm trees were swaying faintly in the breeze, the leaves just stirring in dense masses like woman's hair somewhere near at hand. Though out of sight, there was a clear, slow-moving stream which days we are swimming in the pools under the trees. The girl with the what overwhelmed him in an instant was admiration for grace and carelessness. It seemed to annihilate a whole creature, a whole system of thoughts. Though Big Brother and the party and the thought police could all be swept into nothingness by a single splendid movement, the arm that too was a gesture belonging to the ancient time. Winston woke up with this word Shakespeare in his lips. The screen was giving forth on ear splitting which continued on the same note for 30 seconds. It was not 7:15 getting up time for office workers. Winston wrenched um his body out of bed naked for a member of outer party. Issued only 3,000 clothing coupons annually, and a suit of pajamas was 600. And Caesar dingy singlet, a pair of shorts that were lying across a chair. Physical jogs would begin in 3 minutes. The next morning, he was doubled up by a violent coughing fit, which nearly always attacked him. Soon after waking up, it emptied his lungs so completely that he could only begin breathing again by lying on his back and taking a series of deep breaths. His vein had swelled with the efforts of the cough, and the varicose ulcer had started itching. 30 to 40 groups kept a piercing female voice. 30 to 40 groups. Take your place, please. 30s to 40s. Winston sprang to attention in front of the telescreen upon which the image of youngish woman, scrawny but muscular, dressed in tunic and gym shoes, had already appeared. Arms bending and stretching, she rapped out, take your time by me. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Come on, comrades. Put a bit of life into it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pain of the coughing fit had not quite driven out of the Winston's mind. The impression made by his dream and the rhythmic movements of the exercise restored it somewhat as he mechanically shot his arm back and forth, wearing on his face the look of grim enjoyment which was considered proper during the physical jugs. He was struggling to think his way backward into the dim period of his early childhood. It was extraordinarily difficult. Beyond the late 50s, everything faded. When there were no external records that you could refer to, even the outline of your own life lost its sharpness. If you remember events which had quite probably everything had been different then. Even the names of countries and their ships on the map had been different. Airstrap 1, for instance, had not been so called in these days. It had been called England or Britain. To London, he felt fairly certain had always been called London. Winston could not definitely remember a time when his country had not been at war, but it was evident that there had been a fairly long interval of peace during his childhood because one of his early memories was of an air raid which appeared to take everyone by surprise. Perhaps it was the time when the atomic bomb had fallen on Colo. He did not remember the raid itself, but he did remember his father's hand clutching his own. She hurried down into some place deep in the earth, round and spiral staircase which rang under his feet, and which finally so wearied his legs that he began whimpering, and they had to stop and rest. His mother, in her slow, dreamy way, was following a long way behind them. She was carrying his baby sister, or perhaps it was only a bundle of blankets. Tears welling from his eyes were pure gin, but though slightly drunk, he was also suffering under some grief that was genuine and unbearable. In his childish way, Winston grasped that some terrible thing, something that was beyond forgiveness and could never be remedied, had just happened. It also seemed to him that he knew what it was, someone whom the old man loved, a little granddaughter. Since about the time war had been literally continuous through speaking, it had not always been the same war. For several months during his childhood, there had been confused street fighting in London itself, some of which he remembered vividly. But to trace out the history of the whole period, to say who was fighting whom at any given moment would have been utterly impossible, since no written record and no spoken word ever made mention of any other alignment than the existing one. At this moment, for example, 1984, if it was 1984, Oceania was at war with Eurasia and in alliance with East Asia. It no public or private utterance was it ever admitted that the three powers had at any time been grouped along different lines. Actually, as Winston well knew, it was only 14 years since Oceania had been at war with East Asia and in alliance with Eurasia. But that was merely a piece of furtive knowledge which he happened to possess because his memory was not satisfactorily under control. Officially, the change of partners had never happened. Oceania was at war with Eurasia, therefore Oceania had always been a war with Eurasia. The enemy of the moment always represented absolutely evil, and it followed that any past or future agreement with him was impossible. The frightening thing he reflected for the 10,000th time as he forced his shoulders painfully backwards, which insane if they were diluting their bodies from the waist, an exercise that was supposed to be good for the back muscle. The frightening thing was that it might all be true if the party could thrust its hand into the past and say of this or that event, it never happened. That surely was more terrifying than more torture, and that the party said that Oceania had never been in alliance with Eurasia. He, Winston Smith, knew that Oceania had been in alliance with Eurasia as short a time as 4 years ago. But where did that knowledge exist? Only in his own consciousness, which in any case must soon be annihilated. And if all other accepted the lie which the party imposed, if all records told the same tale, then the lie passed into history and become truth. Who controls the past? Then the party slogan controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. And yet the past, through of its own nature alterable, never had been altered. Where whatever was true now was true. From everlasting to everlasting, it was quite simple. All the ways needed was an unending series of victories over your own memory. Reality control, they call it in newspeak double thing. Stand easy, barked the instructress a little more genially. Winston sank his arms to his sides and slowly refilled his lungs with air. His mind slid away into the labyrinthine world of double things. Oh, no, no, not consciousness complete truthful by telling carefully constructed lies to hold simultaneously two options which cancelled out, knowing them to be contradictory and believing in both of them, to use logic against logic, to repudiate morality while lying. Sorry. To believe that democracy was impossible and that the party was the guardian of democracy, to forget whatever was necessary to forget, then to draw it back into memory again at the moment when it was needed, and then promptly to forget it again, and above all to apply the same process to the process itself, that made subtly consciousness to induce unconsciousness, and then once again to become unconscious of the act of hypnosis you had just performed, even to understand the word to use double thing. Stress had called them to get attention, and now let's see what of us can touch our toes. She said enthusiastically, right over from the hips, please, comrades. 1, 2, 1, 2. Winston rotated their exercise, which sent shooting pains all the way from his heels to his buttocks, and often ended up bringing an another coughing fit. The half pleasant quality went out of his meditation. The past, he reflected, had not merely been altered, it had been actually destroyed. For how could you establish even the most obvious fact that there existed no record outside your own memory? He tried to remember in what year he had first heard mention of Big Brother. He thought it must have been at some time in the 60s, but it was impossible to be certain. In the party histories, of course, Big Brother figured as the leader and guardian of the revolution since its very earlier days. His exploits have been gradually pushed backwards in time until already they extended into the fabulous world of the 40s and the 30s, when the capital is in their strange uh, cylindrical head still rode through the streets of London in great gleaming motor cars or horse carriages with glass sides. There was no knowing how much of this legend was true and how much invented. Winston could not even remember at what date the party itself had come into existence. He did not believe he'd ever heard the word shock before 1960, but it was possible that in all speak from English socialism, that is to say, it have been current earlier. Everything melted into mist. Sometimes, did you put your finger on a definite lie? It was not true, for example. As we claimed in the party history books that the party had invented aeroplanes. He remembered aeroplanes since his earliest childhood, but you could prove nothing. There was never any evidence. Just once in his whole life, he had held in his hands unmistakable documentary proof of the falsification of an historical fact, and on the occasion, Smith screamed the Swedish voice from the telescreen. 6079 Smith BW. Yes, you bend lower, please. You can do better than that. You are not trying lower, please. That's better. Comrade. Now standard is the whole squad and watch me. Sudden hot sweat had broken out all over Winston's body. His face remained completely serene. Now, show dismay, never show resentment. A single flicker in the eyes could have give you away. He stood watching while the instructress raised her arms above her head, and one could not say gracefully, but what remarkable neatness and efficiency. Now look, she bent over again. You see, my knees aren't bent. You can all do if you want to. She added straight self. Anyone under 45 is perfectly capable of touching his toes. We don't have all the privilege of fighting in front line, but at least we can all keep fit. Remember, our boys on the Malabar front and the sailors in the floating outrageous they have to put up with. Now try again. That's better. Come, that's much better, she added encouragingly as Winston, with a violent lunge, succeeded in touching his toes with nose and bed for the first time in several years. Dang it, that's it. I'm not continuing. So, with the deep unconscious eyes, which not even the newness of telescreen could prevent. Alright, so I'm on page 46. I want, I don't know, I'm like kind of tired or something. I really want to sleep, but I also want to, what is it called? So I'll just end here. I'll Think about if I want to continue or not. Okay, bye.